I've got a cat now. Look at him. Oh, there he goes. Majestic. You wanna hang out? You wanna hang out while I talk to the camera? Yeah? He's a wee guy. I have a conspiracy theory about the government. The world government. And maybe the regular government too, but that is for a different place. This is not the place for that. Welcome to Mixing Media. I'm Austin, coming at you from my new bar setup, and here is my conspiracy theory. I think that the reason there is so much water on the One Piece world is because the world government flooded it. And a big part of why I think this has to do with something that Franky said right at the beginning of the Water 7 arc. So come take a seat at the bar, and in honor of Franky, we will be making what is arguably the best cola cocktail, the Cuba Libre, while I give you all of my thoughts on Water 7, starting with the conspiracy. So Franky explains that Water 7 was built on top of an old city that is now entirely underwater. So that means there didn't used to be so much water, and it is not a small amount of water you need to flood an entire city. So that tells me the world didn't used to be so wet. That's a weird way to say that. Now, the reason I think that it was the world government that did it is because at the end of the arc, we get our first sight of Eni's lobby. And the level of ocean manipulation that they're doing, like creating a waterfall in the middle of the ocean, building a giant door that divides the ocean, the Gates of Justice, I think they're called.
The Gates of Justice!
Whoa! That's huge!
That just tells me that either they built all this stuff before they flooded it, or they somehow have a lot of control over this water. But that also begs the question of why would they do it? And I mean, the answer's kind of obvious. Divide and conquer. If you want to govern the entire world, it's so much easier to do that when people can't unite very easily. Like, the world is divided into 4 oceans. It's not easy to traverse the regular ocean, much less the Grand Line. Most people die doing that. So it makes them a lot easier to control and do, a seemingly impossible task as having a single world government. But I think that might not be the only reason. I think that they might have also flooded the planet in order to cover up all of those ancient weapons that the poneglyphs talk about. And I think that's also why they've made it illegal to read the poneglyphs, because they tell the story, maybe, I don't know, this is just a guess, of how the world government flooded the planet. And this is why they so vociferously hunt down anybody who can read the poneglyphs. I mean, Nico Robin, that's the whole story of this arc. Gold Roger, maybe that's what he found at the end of the Grand Line. Because it seems, from that tail end clip we see in Skypiea from the message left by Roger, it really does seem like he managed to put together all the poneglyphs when he made it to the end of the Grand Line. And they tell this story that the world government, it's like the last thing they want you to know. So that's why they executed Roger. And then there's all the people in Ohara, but we'll save that for the episode on Eni's lobby. So that is my conspiracy theory, but I'm not done yet because I think that we can dive even deeper into the world government's motivations. Like, why would they want to hide all the ancient weapons? And I think that the answer to that might be that at one point, maybe the world government was a force for good. Like, maybe the people really were out of control and they were using these ancient weapons, and the world government took control to stop them from destroying the Earth. But when you gain that level of totalitarian control, that power breeds corruption. And I think that's why the world government is now almost comically evil. They have just become a conduit for power, and that tends to attract the worst kind of people. Like Spondam, for example, who's just, his entire family line should be eradicated. I don't know what else to say about that. But I think that in this way, the world government kind of brought on its own problem with the Great Pirate Era, because when you suppress and control people for that long, that resentment festers, especially when you do it violently, like the world government does. And it's only getting worse as the more corrupt people come in and rot it from the inside out. So more people start to resist, and it really becomes this vicious cycle of violence for control. And I think Iceberg has a great line about this. He says that weapons cannot bring peace, only destruction. And with the whole goal that CP9 is trying to achieve being getting the blueprints to Pluton, one of those ancient weapons, that tells me that the world government hasn't really learned this lesson, and that this cycle of violence is probably going to get a lot worse before it gets better. But that's just the beginning of all of the philosophy and politics that Oda injected into this arc, and it drives me insane that I had to sit through Long Ring Longland in order to get here. That is, I can't believe that arc is canon. The pacing at the start of this arc is just so bad. Like, it starts with Long Ring Longland, which just makes me want to punch freaking Foxy right in his fat abs somehow. And it's immediately followed by 2 filler arcs. Like, I think that there's a good like 30% of this saga is just filler. And I do count Long Ring Longland in there. Frankly, some of the filler arcs were better than Long Ring Longland. One of the filler arcs even has like a super glaring continuity error where there are just 2 Zoros plainly on screen at the same time. Honestly, the best part of this saga, starting with like no relevant story at all, is that it really gave me a chance to appreciate all of the visual upgrades. I am out of the old standard definition 4x3 One Piece and into widescreen, and the animation, I gotta say, just looks so much better. Not that I thought it looked bad before, but they really did upgrade a lot here. And they even changed up the character designs, you know, just a hair in a way that I think makes it look more modern and sleek. I think it looks really good, you know, and unless you're part of the Franky family, because some of those people just look like absolute nightmares. Like, what is this? This man is more egg or potato than human. But when you're finally through all of the irrelevant story that starts this saga, and you finally get to Water 7, it is just so beautifully animated and fantastically designed. And I think that that is owed in part to the man who did all the city planning, the mayor and head of Galley Law, Iceberg. Now, I do really like Iceberg and his pet mouse Tyrannosaurus, and that is just one of the greatest lines of all time.
My name is Iceberg. I'm the boss here. And this is a mouse I just picked up. Its name is, let's see, Tyrannosaurus.
But does anybody else find it a little suspicious that he controls all of the business and the government on Water 7? Just seems a little bit like maybe he's not the mayor, maybe he is the king of Water 7. I mean, the arc presents so positively the story of how he united all of the different shipyards in Water 7 and kind of saved the economy, which is nice, but also a little monopolistic. Yeah, like, he got rid of all competition. He controls 100% of the businesses and the prices. Like, imagine you pissed him off and he blacklisted you. You would never work in that town again. And any sort of like regulation that the local government of Water 7 might have exercised on Galley Law is now like completely irrelevant, because the guy who writes the rules is the guy who leads the company. And sure, he isn't taking advantage of it. He seems like a fairly benevolent king, but what about the next guy? I mean, he's just created a conduit for power in the same way that the world government kind of did, because they just control everything. And I think that's just one of the many places I see a lot of symmetry in this arc, though I think this one was probably not intended. But whether or not Iceberg is a dictator, he did create a world-renowned shipyard in Galley Law, but sadly, even they could not fix the Going Merry. And I've got to say, I have been waiting in fear for this day to come. I feel like they have been alluding for a long time that the Going Merry wasn't going to last. It was going to get destroyed or something. And it's so sad to see it finally happen. But it does present a really fantastic opportunity to give Usopp some character development. In fact, he develops himself into an entirely new character named Sniper King, who, I'll be honest, I think I like better. Especially that theme song. I love that theme song. And if you didn't get the reference, it's a callback to the old Kamen Rider or the Toei superhero shows. So it's actually a callback to the previous works of the production company that makes One Piece. So I don't know, I think that's pretty cool. Also, the range on Usopp's voice actor in the dub is just astounding. Like the fact that he can sound like Usopp and Sniper King, and that's the same person. This man is immensely talented. But before Usopp can evolve into Sniper King, he has to receive the news that the Going Merry is not fixable. And it is just so sad to see how desperately he clings to it, how desperately he clings to that last piece of Kaya and of his home that he has left behind in order to explore the Grand Line. But when Galley Law inspects the Going Merry, what they find is that the keel has been broken, which meant nothing to me. I don't know about boat repair. So, in order to understand it better, I dove a little bit into boat mechanics. And what I learned is that this is just another philosophical question that Oda has put into this arc. So let me explain. What I learned is that the keel is that one board that goes along the bottom of the ship, and it is the first piece of the ship. It is the point from which all of the other pieces of the ship branch off from. So it is really like the heart and soul of the ship. Sometimes you can actually repair the keel, but in the case of the Going Merry, the damage was just so severe that they would have to entirely replace it. And if you replace what is the heart and soul of the Merry, is it still even the Merry anymore? This is the debate posed by the philosophical question of the ship of Theseus. So the ship of Theseus poses the question, how many pieces of a ship, or really anything, can you replace before it stops being the same thing anymore? And I think in the case of the Going Merry, having to literally disassemble every piece of the ship, grab a new keel, and put it all back together, it would be a whole new ship. And this makes the futility of Usopp's desperate clinging to the ship even more heartbreaking. He really has no good options. It's either lose that last piece of home or just desperately cling to a slowly dying ship. But it really takes a lot of people trying to get this through Usopp's head. I mean, you got Luffy, Franky, Kaku, all of them have to tell him that there is no fixing the Merry and just everything is right again before he finally accepts that. And I don't even think he does fully accept that in the Water 7 arc. But in going through all of this stress, it really makes a lot of his insecurities rear their ugly head. I mean, he struggles severely with an inferiority complex, which, you know, who wouldn't if you were surrounded by all of these, like, superhuman people? And the worst part of it all is that I don't think his inferiority complex is entirely unfounded. I mean, I think it's really clear from the way that Luffy deals with him and how Luffy approaches their duel when they have it, that he underestimated Usopp. Luffy's not used to fighting somebody who's familiar with all of his moves, but Usopp's been there since basically day one, and so he knows everything that Luffy is capable of. And this really gives him the opportunity to use his strength, his strategic mind, to formulate a plan of attack against Luffy and really effectively hold his own in the fight. And speaking of Luffy, you know, this whole ordeal with Usopp really gives him the opportunity for some great character development too, because this is the first time that he's had to make such a tough decision as captain. Like, it's becoming more real to him, the weight that he carries on his shoulder as the captain of the Going Merry. And he is just so lucky to have somebody like Zoro who is just so fiercely loyal to guide him through all of this and to say, like, hey, this is what it means to be captain. You're gonna have to make hard decisions. So eventually Usopp does lose the fight and gets fully kicked out of the crew, and it really warmed my heart to see the ways that the crew was still trying to be there for him, even after everything that had just happened. But they can only do so much, and so eventually Usopp and the Going Merry itself ends up getting kidnapped by Franky and his Franky family. Now, the conversation that Franky and Usopp have when he's being held captive revealed to me this huge glaring thing that I somehow missed in Skypiea, and that is, who repaired the ship when it was sitting up on that altar? And, you know, how did they know to put it back to its original state before it had all the flying enhancements? And I don't know, that just, it went right over my head. But then Franky explains what repaired the ship, and what Usopp saw that night in Skypiea was a Klaubatermann. A Klaubatermann is a fairy from Germanic folklore that can be both a good and a bad omen, because they usually only show up when the ship is on the verge of destruction, but they're there to fix it. They're like benevolent little spirits that fix up the ship. And that makes me wonder if like the Klaubatermann of the next ship that they get is going to be a character later on. I don't know. But, you know, it is kind of crazy just how much bad stuff happened to the crew in just a single day. Like, things in this arc go so bad so fast. It's definitely the most worried I've ever been about the crew, because in just one day they lose Robin, they lose 200 million berries, which I don't know who thought it was a good idea to let Luffy hold a giant suitcase of money. They lose their ship when they find out that it can't be repaired, and then this leads to the fight with Usopp and then him leaving the crew, and then that night CP9 tries to assassinate Iceberg and pins it on the Straw Hats. Like, that's gotta go down as one of the worst days in history. But to go back to the whole losing Robin thing, I think it's so clever how Oda really lures you into this false sense of security with Robin through the Skypiea arc. I mean, you go on this whole adventure with her and you get attached to her character, only for Water 7 to hit you with, like, you don't know her at all. And she might even be a double agent. This all really hit me when Sanji and Chopper were trying to track her down after she went missing, and they just kind of looked at each other and were like,
huh. When you think about it, we really don't know that much about Robin, do we?
And I think this really speaks to how good she is at blending in with the group despite giving almost no information about herself, which is a survival skill that she had to learn since she's been hunted down by the world government since she was like 8. And knowing this, I think it also really speaks to just how much of an impact that the Straw Hats tend to have on people. I mean, somebody like Robin, who has been forced from the age of like 8 to be wary of everybody, over the course of Skypiea really grows to love the Straw Hats. I mean, she finds her first new family since she lost everything as a child. And she grows to care for them to the point that she's willing to give up her dream of finding and translating all of the poneglyphs that she's spent her entire life chasing just to save them. And I think it's also so cruel that what she's trying to save them from is a Buster Call, which was specifically used by CP9 because they knew that was what destroyed Ohara. And so they're like harnessing her childhood trauma against her. What monsters, like. And this is something that we learned during CP9's raid on the Galley Law headquarters, which I gotta say is like the highlight of this arc. The writing was so good here. I just like kept being blindsided by so many different things. I didn't expect to learn that Iceberg has the plans for Pluton, and that's what CP9 is after. And I also really didn't see coming that CP9 was made up of a bunch of traitorous Galley Law members. Although I give myself a pass on Bluno. He was in like one scene for maybe 2 minutes. And I gotta say that CP9 as like this saga's evil henchmen were so much better than the evil henchmen from Skypiea, even if Lucci does look like he just walked straight out of the Thundercats. But one thing that I was expecting that, I'm not gonna lie, disappointed me a little bit was the Once again, flagrant abuse of the Luffy is stuck somewhere trope. I mean, this man gets stuck between two buildings, not once, but twice, just so that everybody else gets, you know, a chance to fight and he doesn't just show up and steamroll everybody. Just like how he got stuck in a snake in Skypiea. And it just feels lazy. There's gotta be a better way to give everybody else their time to shine. But I digress. So at this point in the story, we also get Franky's backstory, which is literally just the story of the world government doing a false flag. Like, I know I keep saying that this is the most political and philosophical arc of One Piece so far, but it's true. Now, if you're not familiar with what a false flag is, it's where you commit a crime and make it look like your enemy did it so that they get all of the blame. And this is exactly what happens to Franky and his whole family as Spandam instructs CP9 to steal all of the battle Frankies, you know, the battleships that Franky has left lying around, to bomb the judicial ship where Tom's trial is supposed to take place. Because this makes it look like Tom's apprentices hate the world government, and so he shouldn't go free. And this gives the world government a free pass to just go into Water 7 and take control of everything in the name of silencing all the anarchists. And speaking of the world government abusing its power, this all happens because they've decided to put Tom, who is the master shipwright that trained Franky and Iceberg, on trial. And now they claim that the reason they're doing this is because he built the Oro Jackson, which was the ship that got Gold Roger all the way to the end of the Grand Line. But I think it's really obvious that the real reason they're doing this is just because they're scared of his skills. Like, if he can build a ship that's good enough to stand all the way to the end of the Grand Line, that's dangerous to them. They don't want people going there, and so they have to bring him to justice. Now, justice is a word that's thrown around a lot in this saga, and I find it really interesting how they use it to justify all of these terrible things that they're doing, because it's not justice in the ethical or moral sense, just purely in the legal sense. Like, if you are not following the law, you need to be brought to justice. And that's its own philosophical debate within the sort of legal system, is that, you know, legality is not the same thing as ethical or moral. You know, laws aren't always telling you to do the right thing. But, you know, even by this definition of justice, of following the law, they don't even adhere to that because of the whole false flag thing. Like, they manufacture a reason to use the power of the law on Tom. And so he never even gets a fair trial. And, you know, I think, obviously, like, a big part of why all this happened is because Franky essentially built all of these loaded weapons and then just left them lying around. But I think that Tom also shares some responsibility in his own downfall, because not once did he tell Franky, like, hey, be careful with what you're doing. All he did was encourage Franky to just build whatever his heart desired. And even one of the last things that he says to Franky is that he should never hate or blame his weapons that he's created. It's only the fault of the people who chose to abuse them. And I can't get fully in line with that, because I think that it kind of misses the point that the creators of the weapons are like the first line of defense from preventing them from getting abused in the first place. But I could see why Tom would feel this way, because he spent his entire life living under an oppressive government regime that is even persecuting him for just something as simple as building a ship. And so that kind of oppression drives people to the opposite extreme. And so now Tom just wants absolute freedom for everybody. And I think this makes it all the more interesting to look at what Tom's apprentices, Franky and Iceberg, sort of learned and took away from him. Franky, who is more like fiercely independent, took away this concept of absolute freedom. Iceberg, who's more thoughtful and careful, inherited Tom's love for his community. And I think you can really see this in how Tom fights for his freedom from the world government, and what does he do with this freedom? He chooses to build the Puffing Tom, a water train that revitalizes Water 7's economy. And meanwhile, you look at what Franky does with this freedom, and he's just like building battleships. And I think that somebody like Franky definitely has to learn the hard way the consequences of just leaving all these weapons around. But I can't help but feel that maybe this could have all been prevented if, like, literally anybody else but Iceberg had told Franky to be careful. Like, especially somebody that he really respected, like Tom. But what all of this is really getting at here is that tension that exists between safety and freedom. I mean, this is like the core of many of the like real world debates that we're dealing with right now. Like, gun control is a great example of that. But this is an anime channel, and I think everybody gets enough of that. So let's just look at it in One Piece terms, because I think when you introduce the safety side of things, you need somebody to enforce that safety. And that calls into the question, sort of, what are the motivations of the enforcer? And I think, you know, with the world government being the enforcer in One Piece, their motivations ain't good. So if the world government is the enforcer, can they be trusted to make decisions fairly, like looking out for the best interest of the people and not just abusing their power to get their own interests? And I think it's really obvious the answer to that is no. I mean, the world government is out here just policing all of this knowledge so that they can control these apocalyptic weapons in service of oppressing an entire planet. And I think there's a good chance that this balance wasn't always so out of whack. Like, I would believe, like I said earlier, that the world government really did start with good intentions of keeping people safe from the ancient weapons, but now they've just grown into this monster. They've grown kind of fat on the throne. Now, this tension is not something that's just confined to Tom and his family, but also something that Robin is facing herself as she's kind of walking this narrow tightrope between freedom and safety while being surrounded by people that see history repeating itself through her. And to get into exactly what I mean by this, I need to explain all of the symmetry that I see in so many of the character arcs in this arc. Or as George Lucas would say,
again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme, hopefully it'll work.
So Robin is hell-bent on uncovering the lost history of the world by deciphering the poneglyphs, but there's really not a way to do this without also revealing the knowledge of how to revive the ancient weapons. And we know there's pirates out there that are looking to abuse that knowledge. I mean, look at Alligator. And this really mirrors Franky and how he was hell-bent on building all of his battle Frankies, you know, consequences be damned. And the only real difference between the two is that Franky's consequences have caught up to him in a way that I'm not sure that Robin's consequences fully have yet. And they didn't just catch up to Franky, I mean, they caught up to his whole family. Everything that happened traumatized them so deeply that Kokoro spent the next 8 years just downing wine, while Yokozuna would go fight a train every day, just get absolutely smashed by a train, in the name of being strong enough to protect the people he loves if this ever happened again. And lo and behold, it does happen again. The world government comes in and starts doing all of these covert operations through CP9 to meddle with galley law. And this just reopens all of those old wounds that Franky and all of his family members have. But it also presents them with an opportunity to find closure, you know, make sure things go differently this time. They're more prepared, they have more allies, they can actually stand a chance. And I think that this story of Tom's found family trying to recover from the trauma of losing him also mirrors Robin, who has to work through all of her childhood trauma in order to be willing herself to reunite with her found family, you know, the Straw Hats. Now, earlier when I said that the consequences of Robin trying to decipher all the poneglyphs hadn't fully caught up to her yet, I think that the consequences of her trying to do this have. But I wonder if they'll do anything with the consequences of her and the Straw Hats actually doing it. Like, I wonder if them putting this knowledge out into the world will cause some bad things to happen because somebody like Crocodile comes and abuses it. So after CP9 raids Galley Law, they kidnap Franky and Robin and head off on the train to Ennie's lobby, and everybody else follows them. And I gotta say, I love this arc, This is the weakest part of the arc. I mean, like, Wanze, I hate Wanze.
Sucks to be you, huh?
He is the human embodiment of nails on a chalkboard, and then Nero is just completely irrelevant. But on the other hand, I do really love the way that they just completely ignore the physics of water as Zoro and Luffy just bust a hole through a tidal wave. And I do really love the King Bull's Sodom and Gomorrah, which I recognize as a Bible story name. I'll have to look into that for the next one. But there is one last thing about this arc that leaves me baffled. So when the train takes off from Water 7, there are some stowaways. There's Chimney and Gonbei, who is like this cat-rabbit thing whose smile says like, I want to eat your soul. So Chimney is the granddaughter of Kokoro, I think. I mean, she calls Kokoro Granny. They clearly look blood-related, but who would her parents be? Like, as far as I know, the only kids that Kokoro ever had were Franky and Iceberg, who were not blood related. And it's not like she's been able to have other kids because, you know, Tom's been gone for like 8 years. So yeah, I don't. How did Kokoro end up with this grandchild? Where did she come from? Who spawned this child? But that's a question that we can ponder while we drink our Cuba Libre, a cocktail sure to give Franky enough energy to inflate his flaccid pompadour. The main thing that differentiates a Cuba Libre from just a regular old rum and coke is the addition of lime juice. You just cut a quarter of a lime and squeeze it right on in there. But there's also the factor of the rum that you use, because I feel like, you know, rum and coke kind of calls to mind this image of college parties where a can of coke and a nip of Captain Morgan's are hastily mixed together. But the Cuba Libre would traditionally have used Cuban rum, which, you know, I live in the US, I cannot get that here. But that's okay, because I prefer Jamaican rum anyway. So I've chosen a blend of 2 funky white rums, Probitas and Wray and Nephew Overproof, which really bring a lot of kind of ripe tropical fruit banana flavors to this whole thing, and it really brightens it up. It is just so good. Now, last but not least, I also used Mexican Coke, which still uses all cane sugar instead of high fructose corn syrup, and you would be shocked at how much of a difference that makes. It's so much lighter and brighter, I find, than like the high fructose corn syrup Coke. But you don't have to take my word for it, because as always, the specs are down in the description if you want to make it for yourself and see. And with that, I'm Austin. Thank you so much to all my Patreon subscribers. Give the episode a like and subscribe and all that good stuff, and I will see you here next time on Mixing Media. Cheers. Hey, sweet boy. Oh, he's so sweet. Oh, I love him.